One is recorded at this point on. Experts, take it away, please.
Hey, hello, everyone. There was a request to talk about Lasioglossum zephyrus and some other related species, so we'll do that today. Zephyrus is probably the most well-studied Dialictus in terms of its biology, but it's sometimes misspelled in the literature as zephyrum. Zephyrus is actually a noun and therefore not subject to gender changes, so it should be zephyrus, technically speaking. Okay, so one of the classic features of zephyrus, I'm going to try to share a screen, is that it has a relatively smooth metapostnotum or dorsal surface of the propodeum. So this is zephyrus here, and it's got a nice kind of smooth, kind of rounded apex of the propodeum, and it's relatively long in comparison to the scutellum and so another feature of zephyrus is that there's usually a bit of a kind of a greenish tinge to the metazoma, which you can kind of see here. Some nice little hair patches basolaterally on T2. Kind of a shiny bee. Do you have anything you want to say, Joel, before well, I'll try to switch to the head if somebody wants to see the head.
I do, but it can probably wait until after we look at the head.
Sure. It's a really widespread. Is everyone satisfied they've gotten a look at this propodeum and they're happy? It's a really widespread bee, so it occurs from like, it's kind of Carolinas up through across Canada and over to the west coast. And it's a social bee, and it has pretty distinct casts, so you get some really large individuals. See if I can get the head up here without to go up. I'm gonna stop sharing while I get this in focus, but the head is fairly kind of square.
It's very square, and I would say it's very flat. Especially the clypeus. It's like if you imagined this bee was like banging its head into a wall. It looks very flattened.
Almost there. She's on clay and she's kind of shifting a little bit, but it's not the best focus. But yeah, the clypeus doesn't protrude very far below orbital. It doesn't have a really triangular kind of shape head, and it depends on, because there's a cast, the sort of the foundresses, the queens tend to have even more kind of robust heads, and so it gets even more extreme than perhaps the specimen. See if I can. See if I go wide here. They tend to also have like really finely kind of pretty close punctures on the supraclavicular area, and quite a bit of kind of thickly branched kind of white hairs on the sort of paraocular areas. They're a fairly distinctive bee.
I spend a lot of time initially, if I have a hint of it, I just look at the supraclypeus because it's very rectangular and just very clear set of fine pits at a much greater density. And it's like up, that's what it is.
Yep. And then, yeah, those really kind of thick plumose CD on the lower paraocular area. So like right to either side of the supraclypeal area, that is also quite distinctive for a female bee.
I will
So
mention that I had a conversation with Eli Wyman, who was in the lab yesterday or a couple days ago, and he mentioned that the only bee they've been really super successful with in terms of raising in their Princeton lab, or at least without struggle, has been zephyrus.
Yeah, and that might be why it's the most well-studied species, because they used to do this, do the same kind of rearing of this bee in Kansas back in like the 60s. Yeah, experimental work on this. Yeah, so this is that's zephyrus.
Yeah, the zephyrus head is kind of distinctive. Once you kind of get the feel for it, you can just look at the head and be like, oh, that looks like a zephyrus head.
Do you want to show the pleura, the mesepisternum? Because I think that's another relatively uncommon feature, which is heavily pitted and shiny in between. That helps with a confirmation of the species, if there's any question.
Yep,
I can
was
try.
just going to suggest
If I can
that.
find a good specimen.
Yep. So while you're setting that up and kind of getting it in focus, I can share my screen, and I have up on my microscope Lasioglossum crassiceps, which is a New Mexico species. Very, very similar to zephyrus. It's probably the most similar species to zephyrus, but most people never see it because it only lives in a very restricted area in northern New Mexico.
What
So
bee
this
is
is a
What was the bee name?
crassiceps. Yes, I can.
And what was the habitat?
Northern New Mexico.
Is that up on the plateau or wooded?
Yeah,
or...
it's like up in like the Albuquerque area, like sort of like the more higher elevation areas. So like it's not a desert bee. It's
Yeah.
a little more of like a dry temperate zone bee.
Ponderosa pine kind of thing.
Yeah. Not like super high elevation, so it's not a mountain bee, but kind of more of those like northern temperate areas of New Mexico is
Okay.
where it lives. Probably also you'd be likely to see it in like bordering states like eastern Arizona or western Texas, southern Colorado. But anyway, it looks a lot like zephyrus. It has a very similar head. It has a really sparsely punctate scutum. The main difference is in the mesepisternum. So this is the mesepisternum of a crassiceps. And you can see that it's not really distinctly punctate. It's kind of, it's not really coarsely sculptured, but it's definitely not punctate. It's kind of like weakly rugulose. So this is what a lot of other species look like, and this is a good identifying feature of crassiceps. So
Does crassiceps have really sparse punctures laterally on the scutum?
It does, yes.
Which is not like zephyrus. Zephyrus is denser.
A little bit,
And
yeah. It's
and I
kind
have
of similar.
I have obscurum up on deck next if we want to look at that, because that would be, sort of if you crossed a zephyrus with an obscurum, you would get crassiceps. That's my theory.
Yeah, I mean, I only have one. I have like the syntype from the crassiceps here, and I was looking at it yesterday, and it was quite sparse. I mean, it was like on the sputum, it was like a lineatulum kind of sparsely.
Yeah.
I do
so
have before you. Yeah, sorry, Joel.
Yeah, it is. Crassiceps is more sparsely punctate on the sputum than zephyrus, but it's similar enough that you can get them confused. Because zephyrus is still pretty sparse compared to a lot of other species. And then the metazoma also is not green on crassiceps. That's the third thing.
Before you show your obscurum, Sam, I'll pop up the mesopisternum with the zephyrus.
Yep. So remember this kind of rugulose sculpture, and now you're going to see a zephyrus.
Let's see if it's not maybe the best focus, but I think you can see that all the little individual punctures on the side of the mesopisternum here, so it's relatively smooth. So it's much more distinctly punctate than your typical Lasioglossum. And the other thing that you can see, you might be able to see here as well, which is also shared by the crassiceps, is that the gena is relatively wide. It's kind of big blocky heads. So that's even more obvious in the larger individuals. But yeah, that is so zephyrus is one of the few that has kind of a relatively distinct punctures on the mesopisternum and a very smooth, propodeum, but not dissimilar to obscurum. Oh, I think you're muted, Sam.
Yeah, so I thought it'd be interesting to talk habitat for zephyrus. So I see them, but kind of scattered here and there. And sometimes I have this impression of them being on open, sandy cut banks and things along creeks and rivers, but in the open. I mean, but I don't have anything more than that. So what do you guys think of as zephyrus habitat?
I've seen it a lot of different places. It definitely occurs in like those sandy areas, but I've seen it like in like the Logan, Utah area, like kind of that the mountainous area.
Uh-huh.
I've seen like a pretty long series of zephyrus from there. And then it's super common out in Washington, actually.
I've seen it nesting in like the edge of sidewalks in downtown Toronto, so it's kind of
Maybe it should be the city B of Toronto.
That's Agapostum inverescens.
Oh, okay.
Probably a very generalist bee, which is probably a lot to do with why it's possible to rear in the lab and easier to study.
Should I flip to obscurum?
Sure.
Yeah, which I think of as liking woods, but not necessarily sort of like woods edge into the woods, but also occurs in fields too. But there seems to be some association with woodlands. Let's see here. Okay, can you see that?
Yep.
Okay. And I think I'll just point which is in Jason's key. So I'm just going to turn it over to you, Jason. It's your key, man.
Well, one thing about obscurum is that the puncture density kind of laterad of the parapsidal lines is relatively sparse. So when you look at, so you look at between the tegula and the prepsid lines, there's pretty wide gaps. It also has a relatively smooth mesoepisternum, so that you can sort of, you don't see all these, wrinkles. You just kind of see the individual's punctures. And I don't know if you can move it up a little bit, but usually the propodeum is not very closely sculptured. It's usually a little bit of weak striations, bit of a rounded edge, but not evident in that specimen.
Yeah. I don't notice that in the ones, but it might be, I mean, it looks like the central striations aren't reaching the rim, which is I was talking about that in our correspondence after the class, which was a lot of times it's a little bit ambiguous, like how far do striations go in terms of a quantitative thing, because there's variation. So keep that in mind when using keys of any kind, that there's pluses, things are plus and minus, and you may not quite realize that sometimes. So you can be conservative. And I think we can see the aconarial fan back there through the wing, but I could move it. But you can, I think, get the hint that it's got I think it's complete, right? Or is it nearly complete?
It should be open. I think this is part of the viridatum mess. So it's actually it's actually a really distinctive bee, but if you DNA barcode it, it does not, if I recall this correctly, it does not.
Yeah. Well, the wing's
Distinguish
hiding
itself.
it, but you're right. It looks like the central part doesn't have. It's just a relatively dense on the sides, and approaches the center, but it looks like you're right. It is absent. And I'll flip to the side if we want to take a quick look there. I think
And
there
it's
might
not a
be.
very hairy bee. It doesn't have very, like the abdomen's not very hairy.
So zephyrus does have a complete fan, so that might be what you were thinking.
Oh, okay. But they both present as very shiny bees sometimes.
If you remember that,
Also,
I was gonna
Maybe
say
talk about.
Sorry. I was
Go ahead.
just going to say, if you remember the zephyrus, it had very distinct basolateral patches on T2, where in the obscurum it doesn't really, and they're relatively bald. Yeah.
Yeah, overall, it's it can be called almost absent, although you can see a little bit of hair there that are oppressed things, but it is mostly lacking hairs. I'm not sure how this darn leg is in the way here, and the other side's glued, but we may not see well the propodium and the pitting. You can kind of, with imagination, you can see some of the pitting there. I'm going to flip it more onto its back and see if we can sneak a look in that way. With our fancy plasticine clay. There it is. Yeah, we might have a better. It certainly will be a better look, but not as complete here. So yeah, like Jason said, there are little micro patterns of little scribed areas, but you can see the pits, and it's relatively shiny and relatively smooth, particularly compared to other specimens. Anything else to talk about with that one?
Its face would not be as square as a zephyrus. It would have a more typical kind of Dialictus face. So
Is anything to really write home about in terms of face? I have handy viscimum, but do you have anything else you want to look at next, or do you have something on deck?
I do have something on deck, which I thought I might show just because it's, if I can find
Okay.
my teams here. So this is a poorly understood bee, I think. Sorry, my teams on this computer is kind of shrunk. This is Lasioglossum abankai.
Oh my God. That's going to be interesting to hear.
This is the true abankai, I would say. So this is, it's got some sculpturing on the propodeum, but it's very weak. There's one kind of medial line that kind of extends a little bit further, but it's kind of fairly smooth. It looks a lot like obscurum in that it's kind of a not very hairy bee, but it has denser punctures laterad of the fractional line. But this is kind of a really weird bee because it's the type locality is kind of like Southern Appalachians area, and that's where this is from. And this is like this has the classic appearance of the abankai holotype. But you see a lot of things that kind of creep up in further north that key out as a abankai and have more or less the same characters as a abankai, but they just don't look. And I'm not really sure what's going on. But
What about the differences with subviridatum, though? That's the one that I struggle with more than obscurum.
Yes, so it's a typical viridatum group. It's got an open fan. You can sort of see. Usually the subviridatum have a little bit of variation, but usually coarser sculpturing on the propodeum.
Mm-hmm.
Try to show do this quickly.
I'm not. Is that in your keys? Because I'm not sure that. It's certainly not something I've used. It's been mostly looking at T2, where you talk about. I think that's the couplet is abankai versus subviridatum in the key, and I've struggled because it's like more or less pitting on the base of T2.
This is abankai's face. So it's a little bit more. It's a little bit more stretched out than your typical subviridatum. Type is sort of protrudes a little bit farther. There's a lot of gestalt that kind of goes on with trying to identify these, and it is tricky. And it's a little unclear whether the northern populations that sort of get lumped into abankai are the same as the one that occurs down in the Appalachians. They do have sort of a different vibe. But
It would be nice to have a whole series of those vibe pictures because, you know, I really struggle with the subviridatum abankai split. And a lot of times I'm like, these are maybe even the same thing, just slightly different variations that I'm, you know, making up a story about in terms of pitting on T2.
yeah, and I would say your subviridatum, the face is going to be shorter. The clypeus is not going to stick out nearly as much.
Uh-huh.
And subviridatum is itself a problem in that the type of subviridatum is like northern Saskatchewan. So it's pretty unlikely that the stuff that you would get down in like the central coastal areas is the same. And I think they actually barcode differently. So there's probably actually a cryptic, semi-cryptic species within the subviridatum that occurs in the east. So still work to be done.
We see subviridatum or whatever we're calling subviridatum regularly, but associated strongly with forests. So when we're doing forest interior, vernal, spring, herbaceous, pan trapping or netting, we get them almost everywhere. And then some, will split to Abanki because they have sparse pitting and others are dense pitting. And we say those have to be subviridatum. But you're saying, does that make sense? So it may be some undescribed thing, but would that fit, do you think, subviridatum's pattern, which is a forest bee pattern?
Yeah, so yeah, the subviridatum, like the subviridatum that we would get that I used to see in Michigan, I was there. I actually found its nests in rotting logs, so it was
Okay.
very much a wood associated bee. So we think that's what that does. So the typical oblongum thing, which is another species that kind of falls into this general mix, also nests in wood, and it's possible that a bonkai does, but no, I don't know of anyone who's definitively found. This is a weird breed. So if you're down in the southern Appalachians in North Carolina kind of area, pull bark off any fallen logs that you find and collect the Dialictus that you see.
Right.
Worth the
It's
effort.
interesting that while the southern Appalachians have a lot of endemic vertebrates, so think of salamanders or just all kinds of crazy things going on, I don't really know of any bees that are endemic to the southern Appalachians. They're all extensions of northern populations. I mean, some things are more common, perpunctatum, for example, but I don't know. Have you documented anything that really is just like, here's a signal, it only sits down there in the Great Smoky Mountains?
In the Appalachians, I can't think of anything.
Yeah.
Unless it's a bongo.
Uh-huh. I mean, that's interesting, right? But I guess they're more vagal than salamanders.
Yeah, I
Last
tend
time
to think of the northern Abankai as being smaller, a little paler. They're a little bit more golden green, whereas this Abankai is very like kind of a darker bluey green. Usually a little bit more robust in size, more like a versatum size almost. Yeah, so I don't know. It's will work.
Yep.
All
right. Where do we want to go here?
Did we see the propodial triangle and I just missed it?
Oh, someone wanted a more definitive look at the propodial triangle on that Abanki.
Oh, well, you want to be a bongo? Okay, yeah. You can do that.
And while we're talking, David asked, does the color blue, green, gold have much diagnostic value within Dialictus?
Not usually. They tend to be pretty variable within species.
A little bit depends on the species group. So that core group that most fall into from, like Viridatums and things like that, they can dial green or they can dial blue. But other things like Vireki, you do get some things like Vireki and Pilosum and things where you get a strong signal of the brassy yellows. And then I would also say you move into western and prairies and you're getting some pretty bright blues and Oceanicum and things too. So it's not definitive, but over time, you can colors can be useful. Is this David Kappert, who's creating all those problems on bee monitoring with his color questions?
Yep, that is
That's
from
me.
Throw my friend under the bus?
Yeah, so I would say like you wouldn't like if you thought like, oh, I've got a zephyrus and this other zephyrus is a different color. I've found a new species, that would be probably wrong. But like if you find a Lasioglossum ceruleum and a Lasioglossum nigra variety at the same location, you'll immediately be able to tell them apart by color.
Yeah, that's good.
Not even a doubt. It's even though they're superficially similar, it's really obvious. But people, every once in a while, people will find a Dialictus that's completely black, and it's just a so you gotta be cautious.
Yeah,
But this
Sam,
is
I think Sam put it nicely when he said that it can be useful, but it's not definitive. So it's not you don't want to rely. You can use color, but you don't want to rely on it alone in most cases because you can get weird variation, or a lot of times, especially with like pan-trapped bees, you can get discoloration.
Right. You get an oily sheen sometimes on those bees that it's been in detergent.
so this is the Bonkai back, slightly different angle, but maybe that helps. But you got this sort of long, longer sort of carinulae kind of running down the middle, some kind of fine wrinkles and a little bit of fine microsculpture, but not like ghosts on the sort of lateral on the posterior half, and kind of smooth. That's
Is
why
that central? Is that central raised line carina striation, whatever you want to call it, is that pretty indicative for that group?
I mean, it's fairly typical, I think. The other one that you get more northern that looks kind of similar to that would be planatum, but it's got more hair going on the abdomen.
Yeah.
Abanca is another one of these really fairly bald bees, kind of like obscure.
Yeah. A tricky thing about planatum is, I believe in your key, there's it's sort of lumped into the has no to only a little bit of hair, but it does have a little bit of hair, and that's sort of a more key separation thing, but it's a little bit tricky because a lot of times you're looking for something that doesn't have any hair, and like, what's a little bit, because they also, that amount of hair also varies. So I've been, maybe spent too much time looking at hair sometimes. Well, for planatum, because we're at the southern edge of its range, so I keep trying to make planatums, and sometimes I think there are a few down here, but not very many.
Yeah. So it's not. I didn't change the angle, so it's not great. But this has got little bits of hair, kind of basolaterally on TT, T3, but some of those might get obscured depending on how the apparate's telescoped, and maybe some scattered hairs on T4, but relatively bald.
Yeah, and we probably don't want to really get into how to recognize planatum in this class today, because that's the Viridatum group, and that's like the Viridatum group is probably like a multi-day class on its own.
Right. Okay, I said nothing.
What would you call this group if we wanted to lump them together?
So
Zephyrus or a Bankai?
Just what we're working on today. So Zephyr seems like a separate issue, but we've moved into another group of friends.
Yeah, so I think we're kind of talking about some of the things that have kind of smoother propodia that might be confused, but Zephyrus is kind of unrelated to Abankai and Obscurum. Abankai and Obscurum are really Viridatum things, but they're a little bit more obvious.
Yeah, Zephyrus is kind of just like its own thing. It's not part of a group. And there's a few other bees that kind of look similar, which is what we're looking at, but they're not actually related phylogenetically.
Cool, thank you. Andrew is confirming today has been a paraphyletic assortment.
More like polyphyletic. Yeah.
What other people had, but this is another one that I see that sometimes could be easily mistaken for a Zephyrus.
Oh, is this a Gotham?
This is a Gotham, and Gotham in itself seems to be an emerging problem, and maybe there's more than one Gotham. But it can have a relatively long propodeum, and the sculpturing sometimes is variable and doesn't go all the way to the margin, so you can get this kind of smoothish kind of appearance, and kind of basolateral patches on T2, which you can just see out of focus there. And the head is not as quadrate kind of square as a zephyrus with a thicker gena, but you'd be forgiven if you didn't have reference material for mistaking it for a zephyrus.
Yeah, those T2 lateral patches are very triangular, and I find them usually pretty distinct and indicative. And then the echinarial fan, which you have a picture there, you might want to talk about too.
Yeah,
For
this is where things get a little bit complicated. So there's this other species, Levissimum, which we're not talking about today, that has a very narrow opening on the T1 hair fan. And then there's another species, Smilacinae, which is a synonym of that, which has kind of a closed fan, but looks very superficially similar to this one. And Gotham is one that I kind of pulled out, which had more of an open fan and a slightly different appearance than either of the other two. And our sort of issue that's sort of arising is that Smilacinae, Levissimum, and Gotham DNA barcoded very distinct clusters, but there seems to be a third cluster, maybe a fourth cluster, another cluster that's kind of close to Smilacinae, but if you gave it to me, I'd probably tell you it was a Gotham. So it's kind of getting a bit tricky. But
I find that the Gotham opening on the echinarial fan is actually quite small. So
this is where
looks like it is there too.
Yes. And so the concern is that this might be the one that's kind of, I have to go back and look at a bunch of material, some of the material I don't have here to figure out which ones are barcoding as which. But actually, Eli Wyman, who you mentioned, he had some specimens that they had collected, and they kind of extracted the co-1 from those specimens, and they're in that sort of mystery third kind of group, your Smilacinae. And so it's possible that it's mixed. Yeah. And it's possible the type series of Gotham is mixed as well. So I have to go back and check everything.
Yeah, this matches the local ones here. And I think I've mentioned before, we only see it in the spring in woods, and then it goes away. So it's not out the rest of the year, which is super unusual. Only Quebecense also does that.
We have a question to please go deeper and clearer. Can we see the fan more clearly?
I can try to make it clearer.
I do have a Levissimum on deck if we want to go that direction.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I'm glad Jason showed Gotham though, because I said that Levissimum was kind of similar to Zephyrus, but actually Gotham is definitely more similar to Zephyrus than Levissimum is.
So this fan is very close to being closed, and this might be the Smilacinae close proximity species. Without barcoding it, I have to check which ones have been barcoded. This is actually one that I collected from a nest in August in Michigan. So we saw them very early. I've seen Gotham very early in the spring, in the way that you talk about, Sam, where they're in the fallen tree kind of balls from like April. But this is a nest, a well-established nest that I found. It's just kind of on the side of a trail, similar sort of area, but it was
not in a log or stump or.
I think it might have been. I'm going back 10 years to remember where this nest was.
All right. Was it wooded? Or
yeah, it was it was in a nature preserve in Lansing, Michigan. So it was kind of a trail that kind of ran through the woods. Yeah.
Okay.
Next to a big open field. But anyway. I don't know if I have other options. This would be a Gotham that barcodes to like the traditional Gotham plate cluster. Yeah, they could be. But it has a fairly distinct opening. And the lighting will let you see that. So Gotham, as I sort of traditionally considered it, had a more open fan than all of this.
Yeah, we were talking about color, and I think of Gotham as leaning towards a gold, maybe slightly brassy color on the thorax, and then on the propodeum, not the propodeum, on the mesopisternum, the sides, it's got a fair amount of sculpturing, and you know, if you use your imagination, you could go either way as to whether it has pits or doesn't have pits.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. So like I always thought I think Gotham is having, you can see some distinct pits in True Mixed, whereas in Smilacini and Lavissimum, generally not. And they tend to be a darker bluey kind of color to their reflections.
Yeah. We can pull up the Lavissimum too, which is sometimes problematic because it's just has traditionally been something, particularly when I was using Mitchell though, where I would often end up, oh, that must be Lavissimum, and you distinguish Gotham and Lavissimum nicely about the pitting pattern, but it's still subtle. So with Gotham, you do have some invading pitting into the rim area or the suppressed or recessed or whatever rim, and in Lavissimum, it's pretty much bald as a baby. Our baby's bald, but they have no pits on there, and also the T2 pattern of white hairs. And so we can show that whenever you guys are interested.
Yeah.
I've got.
If you haven't, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and speaking of color, there are actually some good color characters for Gotham. The tegula of Gotham is kind of like a bright yellowy orange compared to Lavissimum and Smilacini. Both have a dark brown tegula. And then the metazoma on Gotham actually has kind of faint metallic, like a faint metallic green sheen to it. A lot of the time, not always, but a lot of the time it has a faint metallic green sheen, which is why it could be confused for zephyrus.
And it's a surprisingly not uncommon bee down where we are, particularly in these spring woodlands sort of situations. It's got a lot of shine going on here, but and it's a little bit dirty, but this is, you know, actually I think of as indicative, very dark abdomen, black, and then, you know, but shiny. And if it's clean specimen, like that whole back end is just really smooth. It looks really smooth looking with almost no hair. And you can see this band. So it has the triangles like Gotham, but then depending on how recessed the abdomen tergites are, usually you can see a nice, crisp, fairly bright white band going all the way across on the top and then variable down below.
You got every tergite or just T2?
I mostly am looking at T2 on that one, but what do you guys? You probably see more than I do.
Yeah, I mean T2, T3. We're talking about the apical compressed areas. Yeah, it's
well, basal. I think. Did I say apical? I meant basal. Like these bright lines here are in, you know, my book, a good like indicator, because they're the triangles, but then there's usually a connector between them.
Yeah, that's decent. Yeah. The really distinctive thing about Levissimum that I look for is what you mentioned with the apical rims being bald as a baby. That's a good way of putting it. It's like the whole apical rim of T2 and T3, there's no CD and no punctures whatsoever.
This is mostly dirt that you're seeing on the screen.
And there are not very many Dialictus that have apical rims like that. Almost all of them will have some sort of faint punctures or some sort of short CD. And the Levissimum, well, okay, rarely it can have like some very short, very sparse CD, but generally it's like pretty much just bald.
Mm-hmm. It's almost like Melisodes, some of the Melisodes.
It also looks like that apical rim, like that baldness goes like halfway up the tergite.
Yeah, this is roughly the depressed area, they call it. So depressed area is also, when I was starting out, like what does that mean, the depressed area and all these other gradulus names
actually,
and things.
If you look at that T2, you see there's kind of like a neat line of long CD on that, kind of on the edge that are kind of like hanging over that depressed rim. That kind
right
of
here.
indicates the border of where the depressed rim is. If you follow that line of long CD. So yeah, those CD are kind of long and they'll kind of overlap. They kind of hang over the depressed rim, but there'll be like nothing actually on the rim.
Yeah, so we're calling all of this the rim. Sometimes in our lingo we might refer to this as the rim, but this is this depressed rim area where below that line that Joel was just talking about, then there's pretty much nothing going on except dirt, in this case dirt. And here's the aconarial fan area. I don't know if it's going to show here, but I can certainly bend it a little bit later, but it's pretty much complete. It's just not showing up very well in this lighting. And I'll scoot it up so we can see the edge of the propodeum too. Oh, it looks like a bonky. All right. So you guys want to talk about that?
Yeah, I'm not sure how to describe it. I mean, it's kind of vaguely trapezoidal, kind of squared off at the posterior margin. It's when you're looking at I was going to say that the abdomen with the really bare apical margins. Another relatively common species that looks similar in that respect is sands, actually, but it looks quite different, and it doesn't have a fan at all.
Can you repeat
But
that?
yeah, I don't have
there. Like what species?
It was
versans.
versans.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Versans. So yeah, so the abdomens of versans surprisingly similar. But yeah, I mean, I don't have much to say about. You see what you get with the Levissimum. So it's not super coarsely sculptured. There's some little, kind of posterior medially, the Droege can get kind of weak. But he does have a fairly kind of robust head. It's kind of closer to going down the zephyrus route.
Yep, that's why I suggested that it could be similar and confused with zephyrus, because it does have kind of a similar head shape.
It's relatively big and often on the darker end of the blue-green spectrum sometimes.
Yeah, and it also has ones where there seems to be some casts going on here. So there, sometimes there's big individuals in the specimen where the head is even more kind of robust. And the genus gets a little bit wider than others.
Yep. All right. Do we want to look any more on this one? So the sides, I don't know that we need to look at it, would be similar to almost all the other Dialictus. You know, slightly rough, rugulose, if you will, but nothing distinctive enough other than noting that it is not distinctive.
And this is a really widespread bee as well. So this goes coast to coast in Canada.
Right, but mostly northern. So we almost never see this outside of Appalachia, down where we are.
I just want to pop up just really quick that this is a Gotham metasoma. So superficially very similar to Levissimum. So it was kind of just mixed in with Levissimum for a long time. So any southern records of Levissimum would, in the east would be suspect. They haven't been examined more recently.
Yeah. I certainly identified them as Levissimum a lot at the beginning.
And I don't know if you can see it on your screen. I tried to find a better angle, but I couldn't quite get it to work. But on this impressed area of T2 here, you might be able to see it just as these kind of little white specks. But there's punctures that kind of go across the apex, little fine, tiny little punctures. And that's one of the ways you can sort of distinguish it from this. It's more distinctly punctate. But you got to get the lighting just right, and it's really hard to do. So static specimen, you got to kind of rotate it. But similar in that it has those little triangular patches of tomentum basolaterally, and not the fimbriae that we were talking about last week are largely sort of absent, especially in the middle. There's no real fine hairs along the apex. Anyway.
And I'll point out vibe-wise that the lateral patches tend to be more off-white, and even a little bit of burnt looking, and then they never have a connecting set of white hairs running across the base, like you saw in Levissimum. And Levissimum often has that, but again, because it's so tight up against T1, if that's sucked in somehow, it may not be there.
Yep. Yeah, Levissimum has a very nice contrast. Very dark. It's almost very pale hairs. All right. I don't know how we're doing for time.
About 5 minutes.
Maybe are there questions out there? Also, you can lead us into darker waters for next week or the subsequent sessions where we can get some of Joel and Jason's time. But you need to tell us, if otherwise we will lead you into our own dark waters.
So thank you, for bringing up the zephyrus. Anybody else have favorites that they need help with?
I just wanted to mention before we go that and one nice thing about zephyrus males is they often have red patterns. Not always, but often. So if you see a male that has kind of a smooth, rounded kind of edge to the propodeum and kind of large and kind of reddish, might be a zephyrus.
All right, Jason, because David's here. That doesn't look red to me.
Yeah, that's more testaceous.
I'm using
Not
red and
ochraceous? Or possibly slightly Pisceus.
Yeah, it's red enough that
reddish.
Shows out.
Include that in the red-tailed species.
So if you ever want to understand how complicated the question of color is, just go to Wikipedia and type in shades of orange, and you realize how problematic it is. So so things like fulvous, the color ochre, these all have like official definitions. Like you can type in the official red, green, blue combinations to get exactly fulvous. But it's a subjective issue. You know, ochraceus just means the color of ochre, but ochre is not comes in multiple colors. But there's an official color ochre, just kind of this kind of orangey, brownish yellow kind of shade.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even this. I mean, you're going from front of the turga to the back of the turga, a spectrum of colors. It's not all one. It's not monochromatic. So you have to be really cautious with all these sorts of scriptures. And probably historically, people weren't using them all consistently amongst each other, or
Right.
even within their own sort of uses. So it's a trick. Use English language if you can.
Maybe you can give us some help with this. The problem with using a dichotomous key by a newbie is getting stuck on one couplet and you can't move on. So it's good to learn other characteristics that can help go past that one couplet. Any other recommendations on that kind of situation?
If you get stuck on a couplet, a good piece of advice is try going both ways and see what you end up at, and then see which one makes more sense. So if you're stuck on a couplet, go one way, and then you might get to a couplet that like just doesn't make any sense, like the characters don't match at all. And then you try going the other way, and you find out like, this seems reasonable. So that can often help you past some of those tricky ones that are harder to interpret.
It's definitely a CSI situation. So often you're going to look at multiple lines of evidence. You're going to read maybe of something you're stuck on. Read a description. You would want, if you had access to it, other people's identified material, and you just do a direct comparison. That's sort of the gold standard, really, at the end. And but the key in all these things is don't guess, right? If you guess, then you've lost, because you're if you take a branch, or in Discover Life you say, well, this is the closest was what I think, and your species disappears off that branch or that list, you don't get it back. So you want to be super conservative, follow multiple branches if you're not sure, do your CSI thing, look at ranges, and and don't think that you just step through a key to get the IDs. You always have to be cautious, and when starting, at minimum, kind of inspect pictures and the literature to see, like, oh, you know what? The size of my bee is a lot smaller than the range that's shown in the description. So on the species page on Discover Life, a lot of those are there. That should be big red flag, that kind of stuff.
Yep. I don't know that I have anything to add to any of that.
One must suffer when identifying bees for years.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, like, people who become good at identifying bees, the John Ashers of the world. I mean, they spend a lot of time with good reference material. Someone like John was at Cornell, which has got a really good bee collection, and he went to the American Museum of Natural History, which has a really good bee collection. And so he had, I worked with Lawrence Packer, and then I borrowed, I got all the Dialictus from everywhere, so I had all the holotypes. So I had like an amazing, the best Dialictus synoptic collection possible when I was doing my PhD. That's the only way you really, really can get good at this stuff, good synoptic. So you don't have access to that, scroll, or sometimes you can get a synoptic set from Sam or me if you give us some specimens. We'll look at them and put names on, send back.
in general, need more museums and more places for more people to learn their bees.
Another kind of fun endeavor. Not a large chunk of the Dialictus types are in the Smithsonian, and the Smithsonian actually has almost all of them digitized. So you can go on the Smithsonian website and go to their collection database, and you can look up images of their types. And not all the Dialictus are there. They're kind of scattered around, but the Smithsonian has a nice chunk of them.
That's increasing. So I think the California Academy of Sciences has a lot of their types digitized. So if you're in the West, sometimes you can check things like that. And sometimes really informative.
All right, Claire, did you have something you were saying?
Oh, I was just responding to when I am wandering, like when I've gone down a couple of different paths. As you've seen, I use a different color det label, and when Sam checks them, I'm then able to refer back and study those specific bees rather than having like a running list of weird notes. So that might be useful if you're not able to do, check your bees right away.
Okay,
I have a hand raised.
a hand has been raised.
And that's just me somehow. Okay.
Oh,
weird.
never
Great.
mind.
All right,
Okay,
Anna?
send suggestions to Claire, or we'll never do this again. How about that?
Yeah, we need your participation. All right, well, thank you, everybody. I'm gonna stop the recording now.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Joel.
Thank
Thanks,
you, Joel.
Jason, as usual. All right.